This video was long overdue and pre-recorded.
Warning: the following video contains early parts where I may talk about politics. I know I don't really like to do so, but that was one of my best subjects to describe 2020. If you are easily offended by the topics I am about to bring up, then please skip ahead to here. Otherwise, please learn to deal with whatever I have to mention at the beginning of this video. You have been warned.
Global events in the news. 2020, a year to start off a brand new decade. People were ready to begin a new year and another decade and felt like they could do whatever they wanted in life. To put it nicely, 2020 was like a smooth subway ride. A subway ride that's gone into breakneck speed, which then has fallen completely off the rails, conducted by several major disasters including massive Australian wildfires, enormous killer bees, the police who had the nerve to unleash white supremacy against the people they're supposed to keep safe, and worst of all, a deadly pandemic that dominated the globe and put an immediate halt to everyone's normal lives and forced everyone to do things the hard way, along with causing many major movie delays, and is also fueled by a bunch of corrupted politicians who refer to themselves as immortal overlords, as well as deranged and psychotic conspiracy theorists that would rather die than cover their faces with a piece of fabric. Then the train flies off a cliff and crashes into a pit, leaving 2020 in the biggest mess you could possibly think of yet, leaving us all wondering when will all this disastrous insanity stop before we reach world's end, and it's too late.
In other words, 2020 was chaos. In fact, it could possibly be one of, if not the most chaotic year of our lives. But there is one thing that made it a bit better. An actually functioning president came in to dethrone the orange racists, criminalize his tyrannical acts, and give everyone the vaccines they need to be free, all in order to revert the United States into an anti-fascist country. But when it comes to animated films though, that year was like a hurricane because of all the major delays for films like Minions: The Rise of Gru, Connected, Now the Mitchells vs. the Machines, Bob's Burgers the Movie, and Raya and the Last Dragon. And yet, that did not stop us from getting a decent amount of highly popular animated films. For this list, considering the lesser amount of mainstream films that were released in theaters or on premium video on demand, I've decided to also include the ones that were released directly to DVD and the ones from streaming services like Netflix, Disney Plus, and Apple TV Plus, so it will make up for it. Before we get this list started, I just want to clarify that this is based on my opinion and only my opinion. So feel free to let me know what your thoughts are on any of these films down in the comments section.
So with that said, which ones made up for this terrible year and which ones not so much? My name is Caleb and the following is my top 5 best and worst animated films of 2020.
Welcome to the top 5 best and worst animated films of 2020. The number 5 best is The Willoughbys. As you may know, children's books are one of the most common source materials to be adapted into a feature film. Some of them can be great, like Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs and How to Train Your Dragon, and some of them not so much, like Illumination's The Lorax, and especially that awkward Tom and Jerry crossover of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. But out of all those movies, very few are capable of actually feeling like a children's book brought to life, with this movie being a prime example of it. Although it is based on the original book by Lois Lowry, it feels like it was taken from an idea from Roald Dahl, considering that it contains parental figures with mean personalities, kids visiting large places, and a heartwarming message about family bonding, which are all given out by an astonishingly engaging story that can go absurd with its tone whenever it wants, ranging from colorfully goofy to shockingly eerie. However, like the titular family, it's not necessarily a perfect movie with a few setbacks. It is obvious that this is an incredibly stylized film, but it rather emphasizes on style over substance, where it feels like it wants to display a unique look for the animation more than it wants to tell the story, which follows a group of kids trying to kick their parents out. This isn't to criticize the animation as a whole, since the animation is highly creative and it can also fit the tone in order to give out some funny jokes and some fun moments. But despite that, the movie wants to try to do so much to experiment with its animation that it can often feel like it's trying to overextend itself, and can result in the film being over the top in a slightly unnatural manner. Plus, how Ricky Gervais can randomly shoehorn some scenes with his sarcastic narrations that feel like they're out of place. As with a family like the Willoughbys, it can have some issues, but it can still be a lovable movie no matter what.
I choose you.
For the number 4 best, a Shaun the Sheep movie, Farmageddon. Over 5 years ago, Shaun the Sheep made his movie debut back in 2015 with Shaun the Sheep Movie, proving how simplicity can be both appealing and highly enjoyable in order to result in what might be the cutest animated film in a while. And then when Shaun later returned to embark on an intergalactic adventure, his newest animated feature ended up becoming one of the funniest animated films of the year, or maybe the year before that for anyone in the UK. But back onto Farmageddon, the film mixes a sci-fi twist with the main formula of the Shaun the Sheep series. While it is a simple story in which a sheep creates mischief on a farm while handling a sometimes gloomy father and a long-suffering dog, it now features a little alien who causes the town to riot about a UFO and whose goal is to find a way to return home, and Shaun is now helping her on her goal while making sure they avoid getting caught by the Ministry of Alien Detection, or MAD for short. Again, as with its predecessor, this one really emphasizes on its simplicity, where it focuses on just a few characters and some of the areas they go to in order to put more emphasis on the creative on-screen gags to deliver a good laugh toward the audience each time through the spectacular stop-motion animation, as well as the heart to both deliver some delightful moments and make the characters appealing and likable, which makes the audience root for them throughout their journey to return the little alien to her home planet. Plus, since it is an alien movie, it's not afraid to make various jokes and references related to the biggest films of the sci-fi genre. Of course, there are times when pop culture references in movies and television can make people cringe, but this film has plenty of talent to make those pop culture jokes actually work, being both a satire and an homage to everything that people love about sci-fi movies. On the outside, it does look like a simple children's movie, but that is no match for the power of Shaun the Sheep, because Farmageddon can show that the sheep's witty and caring personality can expand from galaxy to galaxy. And for the number 3 best, Phineas and Ferb the Movie, Candace Against the Universe. In recent years, Phineas and Ferb have had more great adventures even after the show ended. They had a long-anticipated crossover episode with Milo Murphy's Law, the other characters have had several cameo appearances in the second season of the latter show, they made a comeback at the Magic Kingdom Park at Walt Disney World, they've had some shorts on Chibi Tiny Tales, and of course their most recent return was in their second feature-length movie on Disney Plus that a lot of fans have been waiting for. And man was the wait worth it. The story, although it has already been done before in an episode of the TV show as well as in Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius, does the impossible by taking that particular episode and turning it into something unique and fun for a feature film, while still maintaining the show's charm and wit, and also containing plenty of strong and emotional moments. The animation, while not the best due to being TV quality and having some weird and off-model parts, elevates the style of the show to a whole new level that you'd swear would be good enough to be presented on the big screen. The characters, both old and new, are memorable and funny, which adds an extra layer of enjoyability to the experience. And the songs are at Animaniacs levels of greatness, still maintaining everything that made the show's musical aspect unique and memorable. If Candace Against the Universe wasn't proof enough to say that Phineas and Ferb are back, then I don't know what can. This is definitely a new age for Phineas and Ferb, where because of this movie, Phineas and Ferb has definitely become relevant again, especially with tons of new merchandise, and that's really saying a lot. I mean, as I'm recording this video, Dan Povenmire and Jeff Swampy Marsh are actually thinking of considering another movie, and even I know that this is something that can easily work out. There may have been 104 days of summer vacation, but with Candace Against the Universe, I know what we're gonna do today. Make a fun experience that's out of this world.
We win!
And the number 2 best is... Wolfwalkers. Yes, Cartoon Saloon has made their return to Celtic mythology following The Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea. And once again, they've turned it into a living piece of art that presents a beautiful and highly inspiring story. Although it is like the previously mentioned films where it contains a formula similar to them, it is still talented enough to be its own thing and be different enough to bring out something unique that no other piece of animation would have. As for the visuals, they can deliver a gorgeous blend of designs with abstract animation and old Irish medieval art that contains a hint of an art style similar to woodblock prints, which really define the look that embodies a mix of geometry and symmetry, giving a whole new meaning to 2D animation that can thrive on filling the whole space for all the right reasons. Again, it really feels like art brought to life. But if the animation wasn't enough, the film also contains a well-crafted story about the bond between a hunter girl named Robin and a wolfwalker girl named Maeve, in a world where human colonization puts the wolves' home in danger, and they do whatever it takes to save themselves and the endangered pack and search for Maeve's mother. While the animation may be extraordinary at first, it's then that the story packs an emotional impact which makes the film very intense, engaging, and worthy enough to shed some tears. Considering that this movie is from an Irish animation studio like Cartoon Saloon, there are some people that say that it kinda counts as independent, despite being put on a popular streaming service like Apple TV+. Of course, it can be true because there are those independent traits within the service, but that's exactly what makes this film so amazing. There was no need for it to follow any of the mainstream guidelines when it can just simply emphasize on creating its own art in order to present its own story and stand out as its own thing. For a while, between this movie and Candace Against the Universe, I thought there was no other way that any other film could top either one of them. Until I saw the number 1 best animated film of 2020, which is... Soul. There's Great Like the Willoughbys, there's Amazing Like Wolfwalkers, and then there's Soul. This jazzy experience is the smartest and most provocative animated film not only of the year, but possibly of Pixar's entire catalog. It's already interesting enough that it contains a prominently black cast and is the 4th Pixar film to be directed by Pete Docter after Monsters Incorporated, Up, and Inside Out. But the secret within the film is a complex message about life, what living means, the whole point of being alive, and the role that dreams and passion play in anyone's life. A philosophical message that people have almost never heard of in an animated feature, where it addresses life in an inspiring way. But the message is just the tip of the iceberg. Even when you look at the film by itself, it is still a gorgeously well-made movie that is another example of why Pixar is one of the best animation studios of our time by supplying a highly engaging and well-structured story, a powerful jazz theme to help the movie stand out on its own, memorable characters with plenty of funny moments to offer that also present the life notion to fit the narrative very well, and beautiful animation that proves that Pixar can create some very experimental visuals in their films. There are times that Pixar would be expected to make a top quality picture, but even this movie found a way to surpass its own caliber. This is why many people would even consider this as one of the studio's best films, and I don't find it any hard to see why that is. It's a movie that can not only entertain, but can also make you think, inspire, and have a new perspective on life. I don't know what else to say except, go watch it while you still can. In fact, you can watch it at any time. It is a film that no movie fan of any kind or any generation should live without seeing. Soul, the #1 best animated film of 2020.
And everybody knows that it's alright.
Now before we go into some of the year's biggest losers, here are some honorable mentions. I put in as much effort as I could to fill this list with plenty of animated films from 2020, so don't be surprised if I have to make 3 groups of 5. But without further ado, in the order of their release, meaning no particular order, the honorable mentions are Onward, a solid modern medieval fantasy film from Pixar where, despite having a weak concept and having a few generic characters, it can make the most of it with lots of heart, great animation, and incredible voice acting. Trolls World Tour. Yes, it's a step up from its predecessor by not hammering in the message of being happy and having a better story, but that's not saying much given that it still has a mediocre script, but the animation is still very good. The SpongeBob movie, Sponge on the Run. This is honestly the weakest SpongeBob movie, where it could have been a better experience if it was more than just a retelling of Have You Seen This Snail, but extended to movie form. Over the Moon. There is no hiding that this is trying to be a Disney clone, especially with Glenn Keane directing and several songs, and while the story can be bumpy, it is still decent with some nice animation. And finally, The Cruise: A New Age, a passable sequel to the original that mostly copies the story of its predecessor and contains jokes that are hit and miss, and downgraded prehistoric characters, but still manages to save itself from being a waste of time with some colorful, breathtaking animation and some fun-filled moments, plus the fact that it can get progressively better. So, if I were to make a top 7 best and worst, then Sponge on the Run and Trolls World Tour would be on the worst list, Over the Moon and Onward would be on the best list, and The Cruise: A New Age would go right down the middle. So consider this the part of the list that ranges from decent or good at best to average or mediocre at worst. The number 5 worst is Animal Crackers. Now before I get into this movie, I just want to thank the filmmakers for finally having someone release the film 3 years after its premiere at the Annecy International Animation Film Festival in 2017. Over the course of those 3 years, they had been struggling to find a distributor, but in the end, they finally managed to put it out worldwide when they sold it to Netflix. But with that out of the way, I've tasted some of these animal crackers and they tasted really stale. Now hold on, I still think the concept of a circus with magical crackers that can transform people into various animals is still good and has potential for the movie to make the most out of it in order to flex its creativity, and there are some fun scenes. But other than that, it's just a dull and forgettable animated film for kids that has a low amount of substance. It comes with a story that is dull and formulaic, animation that makes it clear that the film has an extremely low budget, and characters whose purpose is to focus on the novelty of their respective actors, including Danny DeVito, Wallace Shawn, Ian McKellen, Gilbert Gottfried, Patrick Warburton, who once again has to typecast his role as a Kronk-like figure, among many others. Sure, it's not all that bad, but the biggest issue with the film is how bland and boring it is. It can also feel outdated as it is centered around a circus whose shows are run by animal acts as its focus, full of people forcing the animals to perform. I think there's rarely any people nowadays who would be interested in that idea. Like I said, I know it took them 3 years to show it off to the public after it was completed, and I'm glad that it finally happened. It's just that there have been plenty of animated films that have been much more worth the wait than this. This box of animal crackers might seem good at first, but inside is a bunch of stale crackers.
Nobody else do it like that.
And the fourth worst is... Scoob. I'm gonna be honest, I was actually very excited to see this film when I saw the first trailer of it. I had hopes that this would not only be the mainstream comeback of Scooby-Doo, but it would also be the true beginning of a Hanna-Barbera cinematic universe, an attempt in which Warner Brothers would take so many of these beloved Hanna-Barbera cartoon characters and bring them back in a way that would return them to their prime, just like back in their early days on television, in the same way that Marvel did. And this wasn't an easy task for them to do, by the way. But what we got instead of that is a tediously average movie whose quality can almost debatably lean into the levels of Scooby's recent direct-to-video films. At best, it can provide some great animation that translates the classic Hanna-Barbera style well into computer animation, and there are a lot of hidden references to other Hanna-Barbera properties that people can have a fun time looking for, but it can't do jack to hide how terrible the execution turned out to be, with a tediously predictable story that tests Shaggy and Scooby's friendship in a way that feels forced, iconic characters turned into something completely forgettable, and humor that contains less of the good ones from the animators and more of the bad ones from the writers. But the biggest issue this movie has is two things. The first is the target audience. Kids, and only kids. The second is that this is the kind of movie that's littered with tons of painful pop culture references, a random use of modern songs that are out of place and feel like an excuse to be the soundtrack, and to top it all off, the controversial idea of having big-name celebrities in place of most of the veteran voice actors where they barely even sound like the characters we all recognize in the first place, resulting in all of its common sense as a movie to be completely replaced with obvious allegations of corporate interference. This makes the movie feel like it doesn't want to tell a fresh new story following Scooby and his friends, but instead wants to sell a product to people everywhere. This is a movie that would have gotten away with everything it needed to be great and enjoyable if it weren't for those meddling corporate executives. As a film on its own, it's just a generic animated feature that's mostly mediocre. But as a Scooby-Doo film and a Hanna-Barbera film in general, it is a Scooby-Dooby disappointment. And the number 3 worst is... Fearless. Usually, Vanguard Animation is a studio with a bad reputation of making terrible animated films like Valiant, Happily Never After, Space Chimps, and Gnome Alone. But out of all the films in their catalog, this is technically their best film they've ever made. But does that mean it's any good? Absolutely not. Of course Fearless is still a bad movie like all the other Vanguard films I've mentioned. While it is a superhero movie, the story is literally the closest thing you can get to mixing The Incredibles with video games, except very poorly written with unfunny, repetitive, and badly timed jokes, references, and cliches, an obviously forced message that's trying way too hard to get into audiences' heads, a cast of bland and one-dimensional characters, terrible cliched dialogue, and some really weak voice acting. As for the animation, it does look a bit better than most of their other films, but it's rather obvious that it does look really cheap with some mediocre looking textures, weak lighting, effects that feel like they belong in a computer animated action TV show, and some scenes containing incomplete scenery. It results in the movie to nearly fall into the levels of being an average animated feature made by Vanguard. It also makes me glad that this was only distributed as a Netflix original film. In fact, that's what Vanguard has been doing with a lot of their recent films. Because when you think about a studio with such a poor reputation like Vanguard, you know that they're probably not going to have something good in the works. Maybe one day, but it certainly ain't going to happen anytime soon. Because let's be real, Vanguard doesn't know animation very well. You know what they say about Fearless, no matter how fearless you are, you're still gonna get a movie with more of the toughest bosses and little superpowers. As Reed himself said it best,
I'm not fearless. I'm useless.
And for the number 2 worst, Bobbleheads the Movie. This is brought to us not only by the studio that gave us Food Fight, but is also directed by, I kid you not, this is what I'm shocked about, the same director of the 1991 Beauty and the Beast, which makes this a huge downgrade from that film. And while it's not on the levels of Food Fight terrible, it doesn't change anything about this being one of the worst animated films I've ever seen, as well as being yet another desperate excuse to cash in on the Lego Movie for another toy-based feature. Like Food Fight, Bobbleheads the Movie is like Toy Story, but done horribly wrong. First off, there's a story that tries so hard to be like Toy Story, except all the toys are bobblehead figures, but is completely broken and bland. Also, they would often try to crack puns, poop jokes, and pop culture references, none of which are even funny the first time. It even has characters that are either not worth caring about or are just a bunch of stereotypical idiots, and then you have the animation. Where do I begin with that? The character designs. Oh my lord, the character designs. Specifically the bobbleheads themselves. With their terrifying designs, the bobbleheads are so hard to look at. The designs on characters like Ikioi and Kalani are so laughably bad and terrifying that even Dave Madsen's characters like Microsoft Sam and Radar Overseer Scotty seem nicer to look at. The humans, textures, backgrounds, and heck, even the animation itself look like they were rendered on a mid-2000s video game engine, also coming with major glitches that need a patch to fix the bugs. It feels like it belongs more in a computer-animated YouTube children's series in the veins of Talking Tom and Friends. But you want to know the most shocking thing about this? It's not always that some of the worst animated films appear more than once on the list. In other words, it could have been even worse. Since the number 1 worst animated film of 2020 is... Norm of the North. Family Vacation. What is this? Seriously, what the bones is this? Norm of the North should not be a franchise. It's already enough that there was one person stupid enough to think that it would be acceptable to be put up in theaters, but it feels like the same person was also dumb enough to even consider making sequels to it with stuff like Keys to the Kingdom and King Size Adventure. And thank God they were only straight to DVD in most areas, but why must a movie as terrible as Norm of the North become a franchise? Everything just got terribly wrong. As for the 4th film, Family Vacation, it shouldn't even exist either. The story, if you can call it a story, is a bad scavenger hunt film plastered with terrible humor, tons of pointless scenes that hog the film's running time to the point where only the last few minutes have any plot, and an environmental message that follows the first film's footsteps and is executed in the worst way possible. It also has the same unwatchably bad animation from the previous installment, still not as horrendous as that of the second film. With the characters, they are all unbearable, no pun intended. Norm has been reduced to an absolute liar. The Lemons are still some of the unfunniest comic reliefs in animation, and none of the humans from the other films are even in it. It is that pathetic. As for the new characters, they're just as unlikable. And Tiny is the most painfully annoying character in not only the entire franchise, but also possibly all of animation. At this point, I don't even know why Lionsgate ever bothered to be in charge of animated features when they don't even know what they're doing in the first place. Even if they made bad films before with Alpha and Omega, there were those rare times they would make a good luck charm with Shaun the Sheep movie and My Little Pony the movie in North America, but then they just became a one-trick pony from there, where their animated films went on a downhill slope, and it only got worse and worse. And as of now, weeks and weeks after watching this, I still can't look back at the movie without remembering the pain, anger, and torture it gave me during those 90 minutes. Even the previous 3 films, which I watched to prepare myself for this, I'm having a lot of trouble seeing those as well. I love being an animation reviewer as much as I do being an animation creator and a video creator in general, but sometimes I get trash like this movie to remind me that it's not as fantastic as it sounds. Norm of the North Family Vacation, the #1 worst animated film of 2020. And that wraps up my top 5 best and worst animated films of 2020. Thank freaking God that year is gone. Hopefully 2021 will make things better by putting an end to the pandemic. So with all that said, see you guys later. Remember that animation gives you power, use your talent wisely, and until you're ready to get your vaccine treatment and everything is declared by medical experts to be all clear to enjoy your normal life once again, always remember to wear a mask.